Women don't talk about money the way we should. Not honestly, not openly, and not with each other. But that's changing. I'm Syama Bunten, founder of Wealth Catalyst. And Getting Rich Together is where the conversation lives. Every week, a different woman, a different path, and a conversation that will change how you think about your own financial power. This community is growing and you belong in it. Please subscribe so you never miss an episode and leave us a 5-star review so more women can find their way here. Now, let's get rich together. I am here today with the brilliant Alix Lebec. Alix, you have spent your entire career asking a different question about money. What if we use the very tool we have to fund the world we actually want? What a bold and beautiful way to explore this planet. Having had this incredible background growing up between France and South Korea and China, spending 2 decades inside global development, philanthropy, and investing, Alix, you have seen it all. You have been on the forefront, which is so powerful and inspiring. I'm so grateful to have you here today. You know, in 2020, when you launched Lebec, this incredible platform designed to help unlock the $5 billion in the next decade for climate and opportunity solutions. And I got a chance to meet you and hear about this incredible work. I was like, holy bananas. Here is someone who has built this prolific life, has so much impact, and is yet so young and charming and exceptional that it left me wondering, who the heck is Alix Lebec? And like, how do I get to know this brilliant woman better? So thank you for being here today on Getting Rich Together. What an honor and a privilege.
Thank you so much, Syama. I think you should do an introduction for me everywhere I go. It's so nice. Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Easy. Talking about how incredible you are is extremely easy. And I'm sure I could think of like 10 other ways to be able to hopefully give you some justice. Alix, before we jump into all the brilliant work you're up to today, the big vision, the world that you are shaping, I'd love to start with the little girl. I'd love to start with where you were in this world of ours, 10 to 12 years old. What was life like around you? And what was money like around you? What were you picking up from this world?
Amazing. Thank you so much, Syama. And again, I'm so excited to be on your podcast. So I love that you asked this question because, you know, I had a very interesting childhood where as a French girl, I left France when I was 8 and grew up in actually South Korea and China. And so when I was 10 years old, I was living in Daegu, Korea. I was going to a British international school. Again, had not learned English when I was in France. So this was still a new language for me. Korea and Asia were a completely different part of the world for me as well. But it was so incredible because my childhood was filled with facing fears and really leaning into all things creative. So let me explain that just a little bit. What was really, really scary about moving to Korea, and I remember this, my first day of school was going to this English speaking school and not speaking that language, but really being completely outside of my comfort zone. And I have this memory of standing outside the hotel where my family and I were staying and watching all the taxi drivers. I don't know why, but I was watching all the taxi drivers. And I remember thinking, gosh, they don't seem afraid at all. Like I wish I was a taxi driver and I didn't have to face this fear. It was such an interesting feeling. And so of course I got on the school bus, I faced the fear, got past the fear, made amazing friends at the school, and remembered that, you know, English started to really make its way into my language when I was playing with my Barbies and all of a sudden started to play with them in English. But what was also really fascinating about that time is I got to see all of these movies from American culture and global culture. And I was obsessed with a few of them. But I remember at the age of 10, I would go outside, Syama, with my Walkman, and I would replay the scenes of when one of the actresses in Dirty Dancing was practicing one of the dance scenes to qualify for one of the performances. So I would go out and I would pick the right locations and I would practice the scenes. And then I would come home, and after watching a film like Fern Gully, I wrote a letter to Chelsea Clinton saying that we needed to save the rainforest. And I love these two examples because I just want to share that I was really growing up in this household where, again, we're outside of our comfort zone. I'm speaking new languages. And my mom was always reinforcing life can feel scary sometimes, but every time you get on the other side and you explore and you create and you go for those dreams, those things that you're feeling, you feel completely fulfilled. So we were endlessly living this life that was, I think, filled with creativity and magic, and particularly because I had this chance of living abroad. And, moving abroad definitely gave my family greater financial comfort. So it was absolutely a privileged, upbringing, but we weren't extremely wealthy, like it was just really about embracing and being grateful for everything that we had, and knowing that we were so fortunate to not have just stayed in the same place in France. But when I was 8, I did not have that feeling, Shama. When my dad came home and told us
I'm
we were moving to
sure.
Korea, I was very angry. I did not understand. But, at 10, that's where I was.
Wow. Okay. And so when you had moved to Korea, were you in like an international school? Was it like lots of other children who were coming from different places? I mean, what was this early impressionable experience like?
Yeah. So the first 2 years was in an international British school. So I had friends from all over the world. There were, a couple of French students, German, students from Iran, from other parts of Asia. So very, very global. And there were these beautiful like festivals that the school would organize where everybody would wear a costume that represented cultures from all over the world. So it did feel like we were not the only ones. But then came the second culture shock. After the first 2 years in Korea, and that was in Busan, we moved to Daegu, where we went to an American school on an American military base. And that was second culture shock, right? I mean, I was younger. I was in fifth grade, but my brother was starting middle school. So I think the change was a little harder on him. But I came to the school. I learned about hip hop and, American culture. And it was a totally different environment. And we were the only French kids on that military base, even though, our parents were not military. So that was a huge change in my childhood, which definitely influenced, many other parts of my personality as I grew up.
Wow. And also, like, how fascinating to be able at such a young age to have such distinct experiences of different cultures, identities, and then also like what people value
Yes.
because everyone values things differently. And until you're of an age, and for some people, maybe never, do they understand their own values and what they hold and how to change them. But when you're young, you're really sort of picking up on like, and shape shifting. Okay, these kids are like this, and so like these things are important, and then this other thing is important. By the time you were in high school, where in the world were you in high school, and what was it that you knew of yourself at that time?
Ah, that's such a great question. So, my first year of high school was still in Daegu, Korea. And I want to say that, I was with a lot of the kids that I had met in the later years of elementary school and in middle school, because it was the same school on that military base in Korea. So we had kind of grown up together. But, there were two white kids in my school. So it was a very, very diverse school. And I had friends who were brilliant hip hop dancers who we would dance together after school. I mean, I was learning a lot of things that I would have not learned if I had stayed in Paris. And
How
it
fabulous.
was so cool. And, hip hop was going through a time in the 90s, right? You had TLC and,
Ah,
I mean, just it was such an interesting time. And it was so cool. I still love so much of the music from that time. And then at 16, my parents moved to China, where I went back to a British international school. And that was really hard for me, Shama, because, at 16, I had decided at that time that I, belonged in America. I should move to the US. I was no longer really French. And I was all, hip hop was my favorite music. I mean, I just really saw myself in the US. And to go to this new place that was yet again international and different was hard. And I remember being 16 and going to my parents in China and saying, I'm ready to live on my own. I'm ready to build a future. And my parents were like, no, you're not. You're not ready at all. And so, but they agreed, they agreed to send me to on the foreign student exchange program to go live with their friends and finish high school in Dallas, Texas. So
wow.
can you imagine going from, Korea to China to then Dallas, Texas? And I remember being on the plane on the way to Dallas thinking, oh my God, what have I done? I am so stubborn. I was so scared, but so headed. And I moved to Dallas, Texas, and I just want to share with you there, there was a lot of racism in my high school. And I had a lot of Black friends. I decided to create a girls band that had an R&B girls band that had two singers who were Black, one singer who was Indian. And without really knowing what I was doing, I was like, let's perform a song by SWV at the talent show and maybe it will bring everybody together.
Oh my God, I love you so much. Okay, keep going.
And it was always, and I go back to this because, being a creative has always been a part of my life. Dance, singing, acting, imagining, creating in different parts of the world. And so, we put this girls band together. I was not the best singer. My friend Aman in particular was very gifted, as was Myra and Tyronica, but I put the whole dance choreography together. And Shama, we performed, and I kid you not, everybody in that auditorium who normally was kind of, sitting in their different places and just not all together, they all got up, they all danced together. It was this beautiful moment of magic. We won first place, and I remember going to it was amazing. And I remember seeing my science teacher at the end of that performance who said, I don't think you realized you did this, but it was a really brave thing that you did, Alix. Because I got called a lot of names in school for, having friends that were not all white. How crazy is that? This was 1998
Wow.
in Texas.
Wow.
So it was again, I was a teenager, you're
Yeah.
thinking about yourself. So it's not like there was this social movement intention, but it was kind of beautiful to see that happen. And it was amazing to be on that stage and to live that. So that's kind of the identities I went through, Shama. in high school.
I mean, how amazing. And maybe you'll have to tell us if you ever did have a short career in hip hop dancing and singing as you continue to progress, because I can definitely see you and I can see you on stages. I mean, now I know you're speaking prolifically about changing the world in other ways, but I could see you on like America's Got Talent, It's like, now introducing Alix Lebec to perform TLC's Creep.
Oh my gosh. But it was always a dream to perform, Shama. And it's still a dream. So I love that you see that.
Uh, I totally see it. Okay, so at this young age, you are creating waves of change in communities in ways that young people do, which is like heart forward, not a lot of brain, a lot of vision, and really moving through with like the guidance of of the spirit inside of you, right? It's like these decisions are happening. You don't realize what you're doing,
At all.
but like things are unfolding. And I have a feeling that that is definitely a guiding force here in your life, because the movement that you have and the current of your life has always been in these ways that are very heart centered and vision led, without like maybe always knowing all the things you were getting into trouble with, or the ripple effects that you were going to cause. So when it came time for university, what is it you thought you wanted to be, and where did you go, and how did you start to navigate exporting yourself? Because already living now in the US without your family of origin, right? And sort of starting to build, I imagine you headed off to university probably a lot more secure and confident than most young people who are trying to figure their shit out.
Well, I have to say, first of all, Syama, thank you. And, I went through this interesting ride. So, you know, I feel like fear and wanting to have more stability as someone, who grew up in all these places are things that would just kind of always come back to the surface at different moments. So what I mean by that is, when I graduated from high school and there was that amazing performance, I got scared. I was like, wow, we won first place, but like, could I really even consider doing something like that professionally? Maybe I want something more grounded. And I decided, maybe I love education. Maybe I want to be a teacher. And I did my first year of university at the University of Georgia, where my best friend, who I had grown up with in Korea, we were supposed to go to school together, but she ended up taking a different trajectory. And it was during an internship in that first year in Georgia, again, not really knowing how this came together, but I was in a classroom and I remember thinking, I love this, but I want to go live and shape the world and influence how people are deciding in the corporate boardroom and then bring those insights back to a classroom. I don't know that I want to start as a teacher. And I have no idea. I remember these memories, but I don't know what triggered that. But it was a decision moment. And that summer, I went back to France. My parents were living in Brazil at the moment, but we would spend summers in France. I did a dance competition in my local city. And I went to my dad, and, I remember it was the end of the summer, and I was like, I'm not going back to Georgia. That's not what I want to do. And my poor dad, was like, what am I going to do with these kids? Because my brother was also creative studying at Northwestern, and we were always rebelling and searching. And, I said, well, Dad, this is kind of your fault. You made me move around all these different countries. And so I'm lost. And I think I want to go to business school, and I want to stay in France. I want to reconnect with my culture and who I am. I feel really lost, and I want to dance, and I want to dance in Paris. So miracle, there was one spot left at the American University of Paris, because obviously I had not been academically, it would have been impossible for me to go back to the French schooling system. So my amazing mom, again, always the hero of the story, drove overnight with me to Paris for me to take the exams, do the application, the interviews. And luckily I got in, and the school said, listen, we would love for you to do the International Business Administration program, and we have dance, the arts, you can study cinema. Like, there's a space for you to do it all. And I am so grateful that that school existed, because moving back to Paris was instrumental for me. And, during that time, Syama, I was still kind of in a learning mode in terms of what I wanted to do. So I loved my finance classes. I can't remember the name of my finance professor, but it was very predictable. I loved the puzzles around it. Like, it activated a side of my brain that I was like, I get this and I love it. And I would do that all day. And then I would go take dance and theater classes at night. And I had no idea how these worlds would ever come together. But I decided I was going to do that for 4 years, and we will see where it takes me. I'm just doing it to learn and have fun, and we'll see. And And so when I graduated, it was scary because I had no idea what I wanted to do. I wasn't motivated by profit. I was scared to just lean into the creative industry. I was like, I don't know. Like, do I want to live my life on auditions? And I got a job at a documentary film firm that was doing films on sustainable development. I had no idea what sustainable development was. And, and it was this.
You're like, this sounds cool.
Exactly.
Documentary sounds cool.
Exactly. And it was between this and an internship at a finance firm. And my dad really wanted me to take the finance job. And I remember, walking through Paris and my boots and my music and thinking, I don't know if that's where I belong. And I was so excited when this job opened up at this film firm because I thought, okay, it's creative. I'm going to learn. There's an element of business. I can still take dance classes in the evening, go to the theater. Like, it'll make sense. It'll come together. And when I started that job at that documentary film firm, I met a really talented African documentary film producer who at the time was doing a film on the genocide and the conflict in Sudan. And he became a really good friend, and he opened my eyes to the whole history of aid and all that had transpired, on the African continent. And I thought, wow, I can't believe I didn't dive into something like that in school, because as someone who grew up abroad and saw all these cultures and communities that have less and more, I want to understand that and how we make up for a lot of the bad that has been done in too many parts of the world that has created a lot of inequality. And so right as I was thinking about that, a job opened up at the World Bank and I went for it. I did not have a graduate school degree, which everybody had a graduate school degree at the bank, but I thought, man, I can get in with my film experience and I'm bilingual and I'll be entrepreneurial. And
how did you even know to it's really funny because when I was in high school, I remember looking at the job boards at LVMH because I knew and people my age were not job hunting for their future. And I was like, I know I want to do this thing. And, even knowing about the World Bank or having, I feel like there is a level of inner confidence, right? To say that, this is a big, and it's like applying for a job with the United Nations, right? Like you have to have a sense of worthiness, a sense of larger than you mission. This is once again, a much broader and bigger calling,
yeah,
right? And this exposure. So how did you even know that you could go to the World Bank and get a job?
it's so interesting, Syama. I feel like I got so lucky in the sense that I was always following my heart and what I was feeling, and when I started to peel all the layers and really understand the history behind aid in continents like Africa, I was so angry with how the world and politics had handled a lot of these things, let alone colonialism. But I was really, it fed the next level of curiosity where, well, how did economics and finance play a role in this? And who made these decisions? And, could documentaries be part of the equation and shining a light on what's not right? And does it get the right stakeholders at the table? And so I feel like in so many ways, I have always been a late bloomer, and I have always learned by experience and feeling something genuine and something that I wanted to try to solve. And not from I have a great idea and I'm going to solve everything, but more I want to contribute what I have to solve for this. And so it's so random, how that job opportunity landed, on my desk or wherever I was at the World Bank. I wasn't particularly knowledgeable on the institution. I hadn't been in school thinking, wow, I'm going to apply my finance background to be in the international aid system. Not at all. It was very random. And it just so happened that they were looking for someone like me who would be excited to play a role on different projects as someone who was figuring out like what do I want to do. And there were a lot of, peers there who had gone to graduate school, who were consulting on very technical projects. And when I started, we're like, so what projects do you want to lead? And I was like, I have no idea. And it's really through my time there. And, I sat in a lot of meetings where European governments were deciding on what policies they would take, from the briefs that the World Bank was developing. And as I was in these meetings and saw all of this, then came the second layer, which is, this is not where my heart is at. I want to dive into the parts of the bank where we are developing educational or social development projects. And I want to see if there's a way that I can contribute and make those projects better. And so as that was transpiring, it just so happened that one of the Asia regional directors was coming through the Paris office. His name was Peter Stevens, who became one of my first big mentors, and a really wonderful woman who was more senior, who I had been working with, said, look, someone's coming. Peter, you should meet with him. There's a position opening up in Bangkok that I think could be really exciting for you. And it requires, that mix of a documentary film background plus, writing. And so I found out when he was coming, and, I found him in the hallway, and I pitched I said, look, I grew up abroad. I want to build projects. I want to change things. Here's what I could bring. And Syama, luckily I got this job and I moved to Bangkok at 26.
Oh my God. Okay. So clearly you're here on a mission to like change the world. But like, let's be real here. Like, how well do they pay at the World Bank? You're coming out of college. You're like, here to like save the world, but like you also gotta save your own butt. So like, how did you navigate like, like, all right, luckily I know in Paris you can eat well with little.
Yes.
So like it's very different. Like you don't need to spend a lot to have high quality. So I think being in Europe, there's like a distinct advantage, which is like food and systems are set up for all people to thrive.
Exactly.
Not just the wealthy. So I think there's something great there. But like, how did you navigate, paying rent and like thinking about, was there a thought at all, or was it, okay, I'm so happy to do this work. I'll take whatever I'm getting and figure it out. Like, what was sort of the planning process?
Yeah, it was a little bit of both. And I will say, I wish I had, I had immersed myself in financial literacy a little bit earlier on. But again, I got lucky. So what I mean by that is what was great about earning at the World Bank in Paris is you don't pay taxes.
Fabulous.
Yeah. So no, and I'm not saying everybody should pay taxes. So I'm not advocating that you don't pay taxes, but it was not a huge salary, but because of the relationship between the bank and these European countries, and the World Bank employees do not, at least at that time, were not paying taxes in France. And so I kept my whole salary, and I got a really cute little studio in the 17th arrondissement, was not saving any money. So again, I don't think I had this hugely smart strategy. And as someone who loves fashion and the creatives, definitely, did those things that you do in the 20s where you buy a lot of outfits and you go out and you travel. You're not thinking about your savings, but it was a pretty good deal. And I negotiated a little bit. I don't think that I probably could have always negotiated a bit more. And I have to say, no one, right? Not between my friends, like no one was talking about, all right, well, how are you going to negotiate the salary? You got to make sure you have this, you have this. Yeah. I mean, those conversations were not happening in my environment at all. Of course, I would talk about it a little bit with my parents, but it was like, this is good. Like, let's go with it. Like, this seems pretty fair,
There's a generational difference too, right? It's like when you talk to, and also parents are biased because they tend to be risk averse and they
Yes.
tend to want to make sure that we're safe. So
Yes.
it's like,
Yes.
there's a parental bias when it comes to like what they would do for themselves
Yep.
versus what they would tell you to do.
Exactly. Having said that, my parents did something really smart. I feel like at that stage they were like, okay, we've helped you with school, like we've had, like, let's just like ready for, come on, Alix, financial independence, right? And by the time I started to get immersed in this work at the World Bank, and right before I left for Bangkok, I was ready to go to graduate school. I knew what I wanted to study, and I got into Stanford, and I would have, I was not able to get a scholarship because of my background. I didn't qualify. And my parents encouraged me to apply for grad school in London. And, my dad said, I cannot pay for you to go to school. You're going to have to take out a loan. And I'm just saying there's a big difference between 40,000 and 80,000, like just, you're going to have to sit down with a banker. And so I got myself a loan to go to graduate school. And that experience taught me a lot about financial responsibility. And so I'm glad that they did that.
Wow.
That it was like,
Yeah.
it's time for that next
Level
stage,
up.
Alix. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay, so did you go to Bangkok or
I
not? Did you? I mean,
did.
so, okay, so then what happened?
So I went to Bangkok, and oh my God, what an experience, and of course, so the best advice I got again from my mentor, Peter Stevens, was you could come and just do the job description and have fun, or you could come and you could shake things up, Alix. Like you could make this an experience where
Oh,
you are challenging. And I was 26. What do you do when you're 26? You take yourself very seriously and you're like, I'm on a mission. I got to do this 180%. So, but it was such great advice because I was like, I'm going to color outside the lines. Like, let's see what I can do with this position. Right. And so I did not just do, the job description. I started to meet with a lot of organizations that were working on children's rights, and particularly because you have a lot of street children in Southeast Asia and in Thailand. And I met with other, non-governmental organizations, nonprofits, other private sector companies. Like I would gather these stakeholder events wearing my World Bank, title and saying, you
wow.
guys are shaping education policy. So why is nothing being done about all these kids who are living on the streets? Like what's missing and what is not working in terms of what the World Bank is doing? Like, why are you guys not happy with this relationship? Shama,
Interesting.
I had no idea. It again, like just a gut feel. It's not like I woke up in the morning and said, we got to engage stakeholders who are left out of the process. It just felt very common sense to like, let's go meet with the people who are building society in Thailand and addressing big gaps. And so we launched a project that was really looking at this challenge with street children and how to really marry that with an education system that would create opportunities for them. And then I went back to those documentary film producers that I knew, and I hired one of them and I said, let's do a film in Cambodia that's really looking at what's missing from these community development initiatives. The bank was building these huge hydropower water projects in the region that was pushing communities out of their livelihoods, and they were trying to do things the right way. But so I got budget within the bank to fund this documentary film. And again,
Was this the first time you submitted like a
yes,
proposal for something where it was like you had to put the creative brief
yes.
and like budget and the
And
timelines?
boy,
Yeah.
did I learn a lot. I learned a lot doing it. I learned the importance of getting all the levels of senior management on board. I was always really good at challenging. I gave myself this feedback that you also got to find a way to like get those who disagree with you to also be at the table.
Yeah.
And I remember meeting a gentleman from UNICEF who slammed a book on the table when I got to this meeting. It was this huge book, and who was scolding me, basically saying, you can't design a project that's addressing the needs of street children until you have read this manual. And that is when I had a click, and I was like, that's not what I want to do. I don't want to act, I don't want to do things that are going to replicate bad processes, but like, what is the entrepreneurial side of this work, instead of endless consultation and talk and talk and talk, like where are the doers, right? So act smartly and respect the process, but like, what does entrepreneurship look like here? And so that's what that experience got out of me. By the end of the year, I was in a car. It was a 2-hour ride to a community in Cambodia. I was in a black suit. I remember I was listening to this song, and I was like reading this big brief around what we were going to go tell these communities. And I had a moment in that car where I was like, am I part of the solution here, or am I part of the problem? Like, if I'm really being honest with myself, and the World Bank does great things, so I'm not saying they don't do great work, but just for me personally
For
in that
you
moment,
personally.
I was
Yeah.
like, I don't feel like I'm solving something. I feel very privileged, and I'm handing information top down. I got to go back to school. I got to learn, what are the ways. I was like, I could really get behind the ways in which we are truly democratizing access to
Hmm.
financial wealth, economic opportunity, right? Knowledge. Like, what are those methodologies so people have the tools they need to make their own decisions?
It's a really like interesting and extremely self-aware thought process but before the age of 30, truly at anyone's lifetime, but before the age of 30, to be like, to whose ends am I serving?
Mhm.
And where are my own sort of visions? And sometimes it's not necessarily in knowing what the answer is, but oftentimes it's figuring out what the answer is not.
Yes.
And sort of wayfinding through that sort of navigational inner compass, which is like, okay, like close but not there yet, and like closer but not quite there yet. And so I'd love to sort of turn our attention to some of these incredible inflection points. I mean, to me, it sounds like this big aha moment really set you on the course, which would become your life's work and the impact that you are making on this planet. And with work that is so vision oriented, I feel like there is it's like it's different than I'm going to take this job and then this job, and it's like there is a much greater philosophical principle here. There is a greater life force. And yet, my love, you are also still human. So there are also like human needs, and like you still want to go on vacation, and you still want, so like marrying all of that. So talk to me about, obviously you went off and did your graduate schooling, and then you started down these roads of really incredible experiences. Talk to me about these inflection points in your own awareness and understanding of what you were starting to really become.
Amazing. I love that question, Shama. And I want to say one more thing that's going to build into that question. When I was living in Southeast Asia all by myself, and it was scary, I mean, I was on the back of motorcycles without a helmet in Cambodia with filmmakers, and we were meeting government members, and I wasn't always playing by the rules. I was going to meetings I was not necessarily supposed to be going to. I mean, there's a lot of, but every morning I would watch spy movies with my cereal, and just kind of going back to what I was telling you when I was growing up in Korea, and I would imagine that I mean, again, I hope I don't sound crazy, but I would imagine that I was some of those characters, and I was like, okay, like if we're in this movie, like this is what would transpire. And so all this to say, that creative channel just brought a lot of joy and helped me deal with a lot of fear. So I'll come back to that. But so when I went to graduate school, I was in London, and it was a tough time because, it's hard to go back to school when you're 27. You've been earning a salary, you're comfortable. I mean, granted, I was on all of these, crazy adventures, but the London School of Economics was great. And at that point, Shama, I was like, I am here to study and figure out, what is it that I'm going to do. So I was very serious. I did not go out and have a lot of fun. I don't feel like I experienced London in the best way. I was studying all the time, very hard on myself. I remember allowing myself to have a little bit of beer to sleep during my exams, but that was about it. Sorry. So I was so intense and understanding, like, what are the solutions to these global problems? And here's a moment of reflection and change. So I was applying for a job at UNICEF to go work in a post-conflict African country on education programs. At the same time, I saw a job pop up at the Clinton Global Initiative, and I was reading about how President Clinton and Jeff Skoll were building this community of social entrepreneurs that were challenging traditional aid. Philanthropy and impact investing were still very novel terms back then. They were not used. And I was reading about the community that they were building, and I had this moment of, you know what? I should go to New York. First of all, like, Alix, like, let's take a breath. My parents were like, I don't know that you should take this other job. Like, you just got back from Southeast Asia. Can we just take a beat? You're going to all these different places. And I'm thinking I would love to.
They're like, vacation, Alix, go on vacation.
Exactly. Go on vacation, relax. So I thought it would be great to go to New York, and I would love to learn from this community before I go out in the world and I replicate things that are not helping. Like this is a time for me to learn. So I
Wow.
got this job at the Clinton Global Initiative, and it was exciting because the team was still super small. And again, like, it was this really exciting ecosystem of doers and funders and investors. I met Andrew Cooper. I was working a little bit with him before he launched Leapfrog Investments, right? This was the year that we were trying to get him on stage with President Clinton to announce, what is impact investing and how is his theory going to help millions of people get access to microinsurance, right? Like, it was an interesting time. And it just so happened that I heard about this press conference happening with Gary White and Matt Damon that was focused on the role of microfinance to solve the water crisis. And I was like, I got to get in that room. I got to understand what that is. So I snuck in this press conference. I thought, if I get caught, I'm going to say that I'm a French journalist. It's totally fine. And I remember, I was so fascinated in this room to hear that there was a market demand, right? Millions of women who wanted access to an affordable, financial loan to pay for the solutions that they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember sitting in the back of that room and thinking, wow, that's a model that I want to support. I would love to support that idea. That is exactly what I mean when we talk about democratizing access to capital. So by a very serendipitous set of events, again, unplanned, I was working on the opening plenary at the Clinton Global Initiative. And it just so happened that Gary White was passing through New York. My colleague, Sophie Ferris, who was working on this particular relationship, was out of town and said, do you mind taking the meeting? And I was like, sure. And so I took the meeting with another colleague of mine, Amanda Chen. And, Gary was just sharing that him and Matt Damon were going to merge their organizations to form water.org to really go big with this approach around microfinance for water. And of course, we started to work together, and it was amazing. And they came on stage, and 6 months later, I got a job at water.org.
Oh my God. Okay. So here you are building this incredible career in New York. You have your master's, you're like ready to, conquering the world. New York is not cheap.
So
you do not get like quality wine and cheese and food like you do in Paris at a reasonable price. How are you sort of, did you have sort of the bleeding heart syndrome, which is like, it's okay if I don't make any money because I'm here to change the world? Was that sort of the mindset at the time?
It was. And boy, was that hard. We were not earning a lot. And mind you, I came to New York 2 weeks before the financial crisis hit in 2008. Where people were lining up outside because they lost their jobs. I was sharing an apartment with a roommate I didn't know on the Upper West Side. And it was hard, Syama. And I was still, I had had some health challenges when I got back from Southeast Asia that I had been grappling with when I was in grad school, then when I moved to New York. So it was tough,
Mm.
but it was very much that mindset. I was like, but I'm here to like
Yeah.
help save the world. So it's all going to work out. Okay. Like somehow
You
this
know,
is going to work out.
it's so funny because I feel like one of the biggest shifts that I've seen, and this will lead into the work that you're building today, but some of the shifts that I've seen in the conversation around impact investing and impact in general is that it feels like to me, and I certainly, this is just from observation and not experience, but my observation has been that it used to be more scarcity driven,
Yes,
like let me be a martyr to this cause and let me bleed out in service of building something else. And I think a big part of that was that there was a lack of understanding of how you can support the world towards a vision, create profitability, create ecosystems of abundant change. And so this idea of the martyr who works in impact, I feel like you have been such a driving force in changing this narrative to, hey, actually impact can be abundant. And
yes,
like there is a greater landscape here of change where I can win, you can win, they can win, and no one has to be the martyr anymore.
exactly. And it comes with also like sustainability, like if you can't take care of yourself, you can't put that oxygen mask on, right? How are you going to take care of everybody else? And I will say that I'm grateful I never did like a year of volunteer work abroad. And I hope that doesn't sound crazy, but when we had interns at the Clinton Global Initiative and we had amazing interns, one of the advice that I gave to the ones who were on my team and working with me who were like, Lisa, what do I do next? And I was like, you're going to get a paid job next. Because if you wait another year, then it's going to further lower that salary starting point. And then you've just lost more time to creating, a financial stability for yourself to do the things that you want to do. And, to do this work, and this is part of changing the mindset. What we are doing, whether it's the next innovations that are going to reinvent food systems or water availability or the future of real estate, right? Carbon light building materials. These are innovations that require talent and time and resources. And I'm going to do a comparison, you have companies like Tesla, right? Like the reason why these companies have reached, trillion-dollar valuations is because of years of government subsidies, tax credits. There was a flow of capital that supported the development of those ideas. And I compare that because when we are developing these important innovations and solutions that are building a society, a future, an economy that is going to sustain us, why should that be part of a scarcity mindset where no one is paid and you're not hiring the
Yes.
best talent?
Ah,
How does that make sense? We're building the future. Why is that considered the B team? And I don't love using these analogies, but I'm just trying to relate to how the world see these things. Like why shouldn't the best graduates of every university in the world, or those who decided not go to school, why should we
mm,
not be giving them the tools to want to develop these innovations and solutions that are going to build a future that benefits all of us and make sure that they are paid to do that work? They also are going to have
yeah.
school loans. They also want to have kids. They also need health insurance. They also need to go on vacation to like take a break
Yes.
and be sustainable. And so I just want to fast forward and tell you that the first time in my career that I really made a decision for myself, I started to really pivot away from the martyr, like, doesn't matter, I'll do whatever you need me to do, was when I was 32 years old. I was, working at water.org at the time, and I was living in New York. I'd been there for 4 years. I was burning out. I just working so
Yeah.
much all the time, no savings.
Mm.
And I had to repay principal on my graduate school loan. And I said, I'm moving to Miami. Miami was different back then. But I was like, I am going to live close to the water. I am going back to my dance classes. I am
Oh,
next to an international airport. I've proven myself. I have networks. I have
yeah,
everything. But man, I need better living conditions. I'm not going to now move to, you know, 4 roommates at 32 to be able to like pay the bills. I would like to have a better quality of
right.
life, and I need it for my well-being. I can't keep doing this work if I don't do this for myself.
You chose.
So first time, 32.
Oh my God, that's so incredible. And so take me into today, take me into not just the work that you're building, but this vision of the world that you have really planted, not just seeds in the ground, but my love, you have planted like redwoods in the ground, right? So like this is bigger than fledgling seeds that maybe some will grow and some won't. You have full on redwoods, you have forest. I mean, you are building something that is powerful. And so talk to me a little bit about today's ecosystem and what you're building and how and this vision of the world and legacy that you are creating.
Thank you, Shama. So, when after water.org, I had the chance, to build Water Equity, this asset manager that is demonstrating how you can invest in water in ways where you can generate financial returns and help millions of people have access to water. And as part of that trajectory, I had a front row seat to building these financial vehicles that blended philanthropy, debt, and equity in very creative and strategic ways, where philanthropy could like de-risk something new and create the right conditions for then debt and equity investors to participate and invest in solutions that just need time to demonstrate financial and impact success. And when I saw the success of these financial vehicles and how we could be so much more creative with financing, I was blown away. And maybe blown away is too positive of a word, but I was flabbergasted that these models are still considered the exception versus the norm. Philanthropy playing the role of a first loss guarantee, even when it's not needed, but just to deal with the perception of risk of investing in water in emerging markets, was instrumental in unlocking hundreds of foundations, family offices, individuals who would have never invested in a water fund had that philanthropy not been there. So imagine you're putting $1 million of philanthropy in that first loss guarantee. You're unlocking $50 million of investment capital to invest in sustainable solutions, reaching underserved communities with sustainable water solutions. And you're making a financial return and you're getting that money back. Like, why would you not do that? I just don't understand. So my thought, by the time I got to my third fund at Water Equity, and I just was still seeing that our traditional financial ecosystem was not changing, I was, again, hitting a point of burnout and really thinking, I want to change this mindset out there. And I can't do it staying at Water Equity. I want to create a firm that is really going to mainstream innovative finance, right? This space that is between traditional philanthropy and traditional finance. There's so many proof points. Organizations like Acumen had already been doing it, Leapfrog Investments, all of these incredible impact investment managers were coming about. And so I thought this is the right time. It was in the height of the pandemic. And I found a really great group of women who had deep asset management, philanthropy, social entrepreneurial expertise that complemented my work. And we really set out to build this company. And from the get-go, Shama, my dream was the following. As a creative, my other frustration was I go to these philanthropy and impact investing conference and it's black suits, it's scripts. Like, we are not part of mainstream culture. People at universities are not talking about this. Entrepreneurs on Shark Tank are not reflecting this. Like, we're like in a world of our own. And so in creating Lebec, I wanted to bring three things together. You ready? I was like, I feel like we've got We've got a little bit of Jacqueline Novogratz at Acumen. We've got a little bit of Sally Krawcheck at Ellevest. And we've got a little bit of Elaine Welteroth, Ava DuVernay, like these women who are like changing media and storytelling, and you can be multidimensional and exciting. And I wanted to, the DNA of Lebec was really meant to be all of that. I just didn't know how it would all come together. So the goal was, we'll start with strategic advisory and let's share the innovative finance playbook with both asset owners and social entrepreneurs. I did not want us to advise just one side of the spectrum, because I wanted us to be tethered to entrepreneurs who are on the front lines, who are innovating all the time, so that informs the advice that we are giving asset owners. And as the business started growing this year, after a lot of research and really understanding, so what is the investment strategy? What's the media / narrative change play, right? Our two other pillars, what are they? After years of research, here's the conclusion we came to. So we can continue our strategic advisory work, but let's launch for Pillar 2 a boutique investment manager that is going to develop or construct diversified portfolios of many private market funds, scaling solutions. Why? There's a lot of great funds out there like water equity, right? And an investor will say, you know what, Alix, I love that fund. I want to invest in it, but it's water, it's a 7-year lockup, it's emerging markets. My financial advisor tells me it doesn't benchmark with my real estate portfolio. To which I would say, but it's not an either or, it's a both and. This water fund is not meant to give you the same returns or the same profile as your real estate fund. It's supposed to be an and, right? You're diversifying because there's water risk out there. So what I'm trying to get at in a very concise way is traditional wealth management platforms cannot build portfolios of these private market funds, because a lot of these private market funds are still considered too small, too niche, too risky to make it on their platforms. So asset owners are saying, I want exposure to impact. I want to solve water. I want to help the oceans. I want to solve, deforestation. And the wealth advisor is going to say, sure, well, here's what we have. And the asset owner will say, well, that's not enough. And the wealth manager says, well, I know you love these other funds, but I can't put them on our platform. So what we want to do is build these portfolios so that an investor, let's say, has an account at Morgan Stanley, we can create a carve out. They'll invest in this portfolio, a very carefully, curated group of private market funds that are diversified according to asset class, geography, and sector. So the portfolio is targeting a market rate return. It's just giving better conditions to the investor. And the investor is investing in a portfolio of funds that are actually solving solutions in a very systemic, sustainable, scalable way. So we've launched our boutique investment manager to build these portfolios. And then third, on the narrative change side, what we've continued to do is, host these private events where you bring different capital providers together who are unpacking what is innovative finance, like where does philanthropy play a role, where does then investment capital play a role. But in addition to that, Syama, we are developing an innovative finance strategy that is going to invest in commercial films and TV series that are going to tell stories that are tethered to the world we are experiencing, and also pointing to where there are solutions and possibility, still keeping films entertaining, whether it's a thriller or a spy movie, whatever. But let's integrate these better narratives, and where social entrepreneurs will get capital from the project. So because innovative finance is behind the financing of the commercial film, there's going to be a piece of the pie that is for social entrepreneurs solving these great challenges. And the reason we got there, I want to tell you one more thing. The reason that why we got there is, you look at a movie like Barbie. Barbie made $1.4 billion, got 50 million views, inspired a lot of articles about feminism, right? There's a whole movement around the movie. And then its nonprofit of choice got $1.5 million as a grant, which is not much. And then the movement dies and we move on, and that's it. So we're not leveraging entertainment in ways that, in storytelling and narrative change to really tie that to where there's change happening in the world. So that's our three pillars. And it's really through the strategic advisory, the boutique investment manager, and the narrative change work that we feel confident we can mainstream innovative finance and unlock $5 billion of assets under management.
Amazing, Alix. Well, congratulations. I feel like we could talk for hours, but unfortunately, I know that there's like a whole host of things that are begging for your attention today. If you could quickly share with me, there are two final questions before we close out. The first is the most fabulous recent thing and a way in which you've spent your money. Would love to know that. And then I'll follow up with my second.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. So one of the best ways I spent my money was, making sure, how we celebrate birthdays, and when we get older, so every time on my birthday, I travel somewhere new and I invest in that local ecosystem. So this year, I got to go to Botswana for the first time and meet so many incredible women, and obviously saw the elephants, the animals, a lot of organizations working on conservation. But I think really going somewhere I haven't been and supporting that local ecosystem is a very exciting way in which I've had the chance to put my money to work.
That's amazing. And then my last question is, obviously you're building something really incredible. What is it that our audience can do for you? What is it that you're calling in this next year, and how can we support you?
Yeah. We are doing $1 million seed round for our company as we're launching this new strategy. So, women out there who are excited by this vision of really financing the world of solutions in a more creative way, all the things that we talked about, just know that, we have a seed round open. And then just, spreading the word. Go check us out online. We're at lebec.co. If our story is inspiring and, you want to talk to us or write about it, obviously all of these things are incredibly helpful. And we have great clients, many of whom are social entrepreneurs. And so do check them out. They are always looking for new supporters. And so, our ecosystem is pretty big. But those are the ways I would encourage.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your generosity of spirit, your excellent storytelling, and the world that you're building towards, Alix. It's really beautiful, and I'm grateful to be on this journey with you. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Syama.
Thank you for listening. This is the conversation we come back to every single week. Real women, real wealth, and what becomes possible when we stop being silent about money. If today's episode moved you, don't let it stop here. Wealth Catalyst is where women go to take it further. Our Freedom Tour salons are gathering women in 32 cities this year. Intimate evenings in homes and private spaces where women talk honestly about money, risk, and what they're building. And if you're ready to go even bigger, join us at the Wealth Catalyst Summit, a full-day event in San Francisco this October. Find your city and claim your seat at wealthcatalyst.com. We'll see you there.